All right, today we're tackling a big one, the ISLM model. Now, if you've ever taken a macroeconomics class, you've definitely run into this. It makes a pretty wild claim that we can basically map out the entire economy on one simple graph. I mean, that sounds a little crazy, right? So let's dive in and see how on earth it's supposed to work.
Yeah, it really does sound almost too good to be true. I mean, how can just two little intersecting lines capture all the crazy complexity of a national economy? Think about it, all the buying, selling, investing, everything. Well, that's the big question we're going to answer. By the time we're done here, you'll get exactly how this thing is built, and maybe more importantly, what it's actually good for, and where it falls short.
Okay, so here's our game plan. First, we'll talk about the fundamental balancing act that's always happening in the economy. Then, we'll meet the two stars of the show, the IS curve and the LM curve. After that, we'll see what happens when governments and central banks start messing with things. And finally, we'll ask the big question. Is this model just a neat theory, or does it actually work in the real world?
So let's get into it. This whole model is a classic Keynesian idea. It was dreamed up by a couple of economists, John Hicks and Alvin Hansen, and their goal was to create a visual way, a map really, to show how two absolutely massive parts of the economy, the goods market and the money market, interact and find a state of balance.
First things first, let's decode the letters. The I in ISA stands for investment, and it's super important to know we're not talking about buying stocks here. This is about physical stuff, companies building new factories, buying new machinery, people building houses. And here's the golden rule you got to remember. When interest rates are low, it's cheap to borrow money. And when it's cheap to borrow, what happens? Yep, investment in all that physical stuff goes way up.
And the S, well, that stands for savings. Pretty straightforward, right? It's just the part of your income that you don't spend. The connection to interest rates is just as crucial here. Think about it. If interest rates are super low, what's the point of sticking your money in a savings account? You're barely earning anything. The incentive is to go out and spend it. So low rates tend to mean lower savings.
Okay, that's the IS side. Now let's jump over to the LM half. The L stands for liquidity preference. I know it sounds super academic and fancy, but it's actually a simple idea. It's just about how much people prefer to hold on to actual cash. Liquid assets versus tying it up in something that earns interest. There's always a trade-off, right? Holding cash means you're missing out on potential interest. And last but not least, the M is for money supply. This is the total amount of money, all the cash, all the credit that's sloshing around in the economy. And who's usually in charge of that? The central bank. So let's put it all together. You've got IS, which is all about the goods market, investing and saving. And you've got LM, which is all about the money market, the demand for and supply of cash. They're like two sides of the same economic coin.
All right, section 2. Let's actually meet the IS curve. So what is this thing? Well, it's a line on a graph, and every single point on that line represents a moment where the goods market is perfectly balanced, a point where the total amount of investment in the economy equals the total amount of savings.
Now, you'll notice it slopes downward. This is a really key part. The graph is plotting interest rates against the total economic output, GDP. And this downward slope is telling us there's a clear inverse relationship between the two.
Let's walk through the logic step by step. So, imagine interest rates fall. Step 1. What happens next? Well, borrowing gets cheaper, so businesses start investing more, building those factories we talked about. At the exact same time, you and I are less motivated to save, so we spend more. All that extra spending and investing creates a ton of economic activity. And what does that do? It pushes up the total economic output, GDP. Boom. Lower rates lead to higher output. That's why the IS curve slopes down.
Okay, time for part 3. Let's meet the other hero of our story, the LM curve. This line represents equilibrium in the money market. Every point on this curve is where the demand for cash, that liquidity preference thing, perfectly matches the total supply of money.
And you'll see right away it slopes upward, the exact opposite of the IS curve. So why? Well, think about it. As the economy gets hotter and output goes up, everyone needs more cash to buy and sell all this new stuff. If the total money supply is fixed, this higher demand for cash naturally pushes interest rates up. Banks have to offer you a better deal to get you to part with your cash and deposit it.
And now for the grand finale. We put the two curves together on the same graph, and the magic, the whole point of this model happens right where they cross. That one single point of intersection, that's it. That's the general equilibrium for the entire economy. It is the one and only combination of interest rates and economic output where the goods market and the money market are both happy, both in perfect balance. It's literally X marks the spot on our economic treasure map.
Okay, section 4. Now that we've built our map, let's have some fun with it. What happens when the people in charge, the government and the central bank, start pulling levers and trying to change things? This is where the model goes from a neat theory to a powerful tool.
So, you've got two main players. On one side, you have the government, using fiscal policy. That's stuff like changing government spending or taxes. This messes with the goods market, so it's going to shift our IS curve. On the other side, you've got the central bank using monetary policy, which is all about changing the money supply. That hits the money market, so it shifts the LM curve. Two different tools, two different curves.
So let's run a scenario. Let's say the government decides to go on a spending spree. Building new roads, bridges, the whole shebang. That's a huge injection of cash directly into the goods market. What happens to our graph? The entire IS curve shifts over to the right. And where's our new equilibrium point? Well, you can see it right there. Output is higher, meaning the economy grew. But look, interest rates also went up.
Okay, now let's try a different approach. What if, instead, the central bank decides to act? Let's say they fire up the printing presses and increase the money supply, making cash a lot easier to come by. This time, it's the LM curve that shifts to the right. Now look at our new equilibrium point. The economy still grows, output goes up, but this time, interest rates actually fall. See that? Two different ways to boost the economy, but with totally different effects on interest rates. Pretty cool, right?
All right, final section, model versus reality. We've seen how elegant and neat this all looks on paper. But let's be honest, the real economy is a messy, complicated beast. So how useful is this map really?
Well, on the one hand, its biggest strength is its simplicity. It is an absolutely fantastic way to get your head around the basic logic of Keynesian economics. And for people making policy, it gives them a simple framework to think through the consequences of their actions. How decision might ripple out and affect both economic growth and interest rates.
But, and this is a big but, that same simplicity is also its greatest weakness. To make the graph work, the model has to make some huge assumptions that just aren't true in the real world. For one, it completely ignores inflation. That's a massive oversight. It also pretends we live in a closed-off economy with no international trade, and it doesn't account for the fact that people aren't dumb. They see policy changes coming and change how they act.
And don't just take my word for it. Get this. Even John Hicks, one of the guys who invented the model, said years later that it was best used as a classroom model rather than in practical application. Wow, that's a pretty big deal coming from the creator himself. It really tells you that its true power isn't in predicting the future, but in teaching us the fundamentals. Which brings us to our final big picture question. If its own creator basically said it's a teaching tool, why are we still talking about it? Why is it a cornerstone of every single intro to macroeconomics class? What does the fact that we still rely so much on this simplified, imperfect map tell us about our deep-seated need to make sense of an economy that might just be too complex to ever fit neatly into a single graph?
Like and subscribe.